This week on Jerusalem Dateline, we take a look at the current state of U.S.-Israeli relations and find out what many Israelis think of President Obama. Plus, a look at one of the most influential men in the Middle East, Iran's shadowy general Qasem Soleimani. And Israeli archaeologists say they've solved one of the biggest mysteries about ancient Jerusalem. All this and more this week on Jerusalem. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's meeting with President Obama at the White House is their first face-to-face since the U.S. signed the Iranian nuclear deal. The meeting could set the tone for U.S.-Israeli relations for the rest of Obama's time in office. It's no secret the relationship between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been one of the most strained in the history of U.S.-Israel relations. Former Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren says the Iranian nuclear deal adds a new layer of frost to an already cold relationship.
The issue will be how can the United States help Israel grapple with the greatly enhanced dangers that have been created by the deal.
Oren points to Israel's northern border to cite a major example of that enhanced danger. Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon receive $1 billion from Iran each year.
With the $1 billion a year, Hezbollah has purchased 150,000 rockets, all pointed at us. This year, Iran's going to get $150 billion in sanctions relief. That number over the next coming years is going to go up to about $700 billion. So how many rockets will Hezbollah be able to buy with $2 billion, $3 billion, $10 billion?
Oren says Israel should go on the offensive against Iran.
We need not only to defend ourselves against Iran, we need to deter Iran.
In part because of the Iranian deal, Israelis' opinion of President Obama is at historic lows. More than 60% consider him the worst U.S. president for Israel in the past 30 years. And nearly 80% believe the nuclear deal with Iran puts Israel in danger. We found those views reflected on the streets of Jerusalem.
He's abating, with the other countries, Iran and Iraq, and treating them like allies rather than Israel.
I think that people feel very insecure because of Obama. I don't think it seems like he's very ignorant as to the position he takes on with respect to Iran.
I think he's the most anti-Israel president since Jimmy Carter. I'm very happy that his term is ending, and I'm hoping that the next president will be pro-Israel.
Oren came to Washington as ambassador, then watched an international friendship turn sour, and wrote about his experiences in the book Ally. He still believes, regardless of the strain, that U.S.-Israel relations are crucial to the stability of the region and the world. Israeli forces raided a Palestinian radio station it says was inciting violence in the West Bank. And as Julie Stahl reports, some Israelis are finding other ways to stop Palestinian incitement.
October was a rough month in Israel. Palestinians carried out some 65 various terror attacks that killed 11 and injured nearly 150 people. And the terror is likely to continue.
You actually can see that in the past month there were tens of thousands of posts telling people to go out and kill Jews, teaching them how to stab, how to twist the knife, where exactly in the body should be the stabbing.
That type of incitement led the IDF to confiscate equipment at the Al Hurriya radio station in Hebron. But it's social media that Israeli leaders blame most for spreading hatred against Jews and encouraging terror.
It connects all the people that want to kill with the people who can teach them how to kill.
Attorney Nitzana Darshan Leitner is doing something about it. She filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 20,000 Israelis against Facebook in New York.
It's not a monetary suit. The injunction claims asked for two things. First, that Facebook really will take down these posts of incitements, these videos that call to kill Jews, but also monitor it yourself, to be proactive.
According to Darshan Leitner, Facebook has logarithms that could help it find the hateful material and take it down.
Same way they can detect pornography and not let it be put up, they should do the same thing with the incitement.
In an email response to CBN News, a Facebook spokesperson said, "We want people to feel safe when using Facebook. There is no place for content encouraging violence, direct threats, terrorism, or hate speech on Facebook. We urge people to use our reporting tools if they find content that they believe violates our standards so we can investigate and take swift action." Darshan Leitner told CBN News it would take months before her case would be heard, but she's seen signs that Facebook might make changes.
Same posts that Facebook refused to touch before we called to the lawsuit are taken down one by one within an hour. And Facebook is taking down pages of terror organizations like Hamas, pages that from the beginning should not be put on.
Darshan Leitner said they started with Facebook because it's the most widely used social media by Palestinians and Israeli Arabs. After this, she plans to pursue other outlets such as YouTube and Twitter. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
ISIS is advancing on a Christian town in northern Syria. Sadat is a small town on the corridor that runs from the capital to Homs. It's a mostly Christian town with multiple churches and Christian relics. The people there speak ancient Aramaic, the language of Jesus. CBN Chief International Correspondent Gary Lane has been in the vicinity of Sadat in his travels to Syria, and he spoke about how the captivity of this town is strategic for ISIS.
That is a very strategic corridor. It's a supply route. If they come into the town and then move right out to the highway, they can control that highway and the flow of anything military in and out of that area.
Up next, a closer look at one of the most influential men in the Middle East and an enemy of both Israel and the U.S., Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. A dangerous new alliance is forming in the Middle East. Russia has joined forces with Iran, Hezbollah, and Bashar al-Assad in Syria. But controlling Syria may only be the beginning of their plans. Eric Steckelbeck takes a closer look at this alliance and the man at the center of it.
It's a nightmare scenario, a military powerhouse with a massive nuclear arsenal, openly aligning itself with Islamic terrorists who are hostile to America and Israel. That's exactly the situation today in Syria, as the Russian military coordinates with the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran, and its proxy Hezbollah. The Russian-Iranian alliance is helping to prop up the regime of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. He'd been on the ropes, threatened on all sides by ISIS, al-Qaeda, and Syrian rebel groups. And then the Russian bear stepped in. Russia began airstrikes in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime in late September, after a steady military buildup. The buildup began shortly after an Iranian general named Qasem Soleimani paid a visit to Moscow in July. It was no coincidence. Although he largely avoids the limelight, Soleimani has been called the most powerful operative in the Middle East today.
In general terms, he's a uniformed Osama bin Laden. He's anti-U.S. He is able to travel to Middle East and North Africa and basically funding and directing Iranian proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and those are just the ones that start with an H.
Michael Pregent is executive director of Veterans Against the Iran Deal. He served as an intelligence advisor to General David Petraeus in Iraq, where he saw Soleimani's handiwork up close. Talk about, in specific, the kind of attacks that Soleimani and the Iranians helped carry out against U.S. troops in Iraq.
Okay, well, there were the explosively formed penetrators. That was a munition that the Iranians helped Shia militias build. They brought them to Iran, trained them on how to use it, and actually set them up in Iraq and directed their attacks against U.S. forces.
U.S. officials believe those Iranian-supplied weapons led to the deaths of at least 500 American soldiers in Iraq. As leader of the elite Quds Force wing of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, Soleimani played a central role.
Soleimani is responsible for Quds Force external operations. He has the Iraq portfolio, he has the Syria portfolio. He's responsible for keeping Assad in power for 4 years. He has a hand in Assad in the death of 200,000 Syrians.
Israel, however, is Soleimani's ultimate target.
The Quds Force, Quds means Jerusalem. The Quds Force is an external force hell-bent on taking Jerusalem back. That's their long-term strategic goal.
In pursuit of that goal, Iran is attempting to establish a foothold in Syria's Golan Heights, along Israel's border. In January 2015, an Israeli helicopter strike killed a group of top Hezbollah operatives near the Golan border, along with an Iranian brigadier general. That setback didn't deter Iran's long-term plans. Last month, Soleimani personally visited the Golan to rally Syrian and Hezbollah troops there.
Qasem Soleimani has become much more public in his profile. Lots of pictures of him standing alongside Iraqi Shia militants in Iraq, in Syria. He's taken a very public role.
Likewise, Iran is stepping up its role in Syria's civil war. Some 2,000 Iranian and Iranian-backed fighters are now in Syria battling to prop up the Assad regime. They're joined by thousands of Hezbollah fighters and supported by a daily barrage of Russian airstrikes against anti-Assad targets. In addition, Russia, Iran, the Assad regime, and Iraq are now all reportedly sharing intelligence. An emergency visit by Qasem Soleimani to Moscow in July reportedly sealed the deal for Russian involvement in Syria. It was a visit made in direct violation of UN sanctions against the Quds Force leader.
When we say that sanctions are still on Soleimani, they're not, because the supreme leader will give Soleimani as much money as Soleimani needs to continue Iran's export of terrorism. He answers directly to the supreme leader. Qasem Soleimani answers directly to Khamenei, and that's the problem. We don't understand that.
As for Russia, its presence in the Middle East and its growing alliance with Iran raises serious questions for Israel, such as how will Russia react to a potential war between Israel and Hezbollah, or an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities? The answers remain unclear. Eric Stakelbeck, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, we talk with best-selling author and Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg about the #1 threat to world peace, apocalyptic Islam. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Best-selling author and Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg says it's not just radical Islam that threatens Israel, the U.S., and Western civilization, but apocalyptic Islam. We talk with Rosenberg about this threat and other developments in the Middle East on the southern steps of the Temple Mount here in Jerusalem. Joel, it's great to be with you back here in the epicenter in the Temple Mount here in Jerusalem.
It's an honor. Thank you, Chris.
Great to be with you. A lot of things have happened since we last talked, and especially the biggest development is Vladimir Putin has come into Syria in a big way militarily. What's your reaction to this development?
We are watching a catastrophic capitulation by the American government in the Middle East. It was bedrock U.S. foreign policy for 6-7 decades to keep the Russians out of the Middle East. And yet we have, the President Obama and his administration have surrendered. We have withdrawn, we have surrendered, we have ceded the playing field to Vladimir Putin. He's an imperialist, he's dangerous. And the fact that he is operating with abandon, with complete freedom, militarily, just a few miles north of Israel is stunning and incredibly dangerous.
What are the consequences for the region and for Israel as well?
From my perspective, the first question you have to ask is, are we watching the preparations for the war of Gog and Magog? You know, when you look at the prophecies of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and if you conclude, as I have, that the historical, detective work leads you to that Magog is Russia, then you are looking for an evil leader emerging in Magog, in Russia, who will form a military alliance with Iran and a group of other countries that will come against Israel in the last days from the north. Now, in the 2,500 years since Ezekiel wrote that prophecy, Russia and Iran never had a military alliance, where they were never even friends. The last time Russia ever took military operations of this magnitude in the Middle East was to invade Iran at the end of World War II. Does that mean the prophecies of the War of Gog and Magog will happen soon or even in our lifetime? No. This could be decades or theoretically centuries off. However, when you actually have Russia and Iran fighting on the same side, just miles north of the mountains of Israel, it does give you pause. Iran, who curses Israel every single day of the year, and every few days or every few weeks says we're going to annihilate the Jewish state, Israel's going to disappear. Russia, look, I don't believe that Russian leaders, Putin namely, understand the apocalyptic eschatology or end times theology of Iran's leaders. I believe that Putin is a czar, he's an imperialist, he sees an opportunity. He sees President Obama cutting and running, surrendering, capitulating from the Middle East. He sees an opportunity to move. So I believe that Putin this is a power play for him, but he doesn't understand who he's working with. Iran's leaders are apocalyptically motivated. They have an end times theology. And that is so different from the way Putin sees the world. But the danger is that Putin could get hooked into an attack or a threat against Israel that he doesn't initially plan because he doesn't know who his partners are.
In all of the things that are going on, what do people in the West, particularly the United States, need to know about what's happening here in the Middle East?
Darkness is falling on this region, on the world, but darkness is falling on this region. Muslims are being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. There are more than 300,000 dead just in Syria. This is genocide. And it's happening right on the border of a country born out of the ashes of genocide. Every political leader in the United States has always said, never again. We'll never allow the Holocaust to happen again. And yet, the Obama administration is helping Iran on a pathway to having genocidal weaponry. Christians need to understand that these are dark times. Now, there's hope. Christ is coming, and we need to spread the gospel, and people are coming to Christ, Muslims, Jews, more than ever before, out of the chaos and the darkness. But the church can't wait for the American government or any government to do the right thing. We have a command, a series of commands from Christ. Proclaim the gospel, care for the poor, strengthen the church, pray for the persecuted, stand with the suffering, and that's what we need to be doing like never before.
Certainly a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and the whole Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Israeli archaeologists say they've solved one of the biggest mysteries about ancient Jerusalem. Stay tuned for the answer. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Israeli archaeologists announced one of the most important discoveries in years that answers one of the most perplexing questions about the ancient city of Jerusalem. For more than 100 years, archaeologists searched for the Greek fortress known as the Acra from the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BC. Now they say they've found it.
We are now can be more than positive that we are facing part of the stronghold that used to house the upper part of the city of David in the time of Antiochus IV.
Antiochus IV built the more than 50 feet tall fortress in order to control Jerusalem. After he defiled the Jewish temple, the Maccabees, also known as the Hasmoneans, revolted. The excavation discovered evidence of that revolt. The discovery confirms the accounts of the historian Josephus and the Book of Maccabees.
In the Book of Maccabees, it specifically says that the Acra fortress is built in the city of David.
It also fills in another big piece of the puzzle of ancient Jerusalem.
Today, because of this discovery, we can connect other elements that were isolated thus far and put them all together to see the real fortress or stronghold here on the upper part of the city of David.
Rabbi Barnea Levi Selavan says the discovery brings to life the story of Hanukkah.
So I have to tell a 4th grader or a 4-year-old or a cynical college kid, the mighty Greek Empire, I can now show it with an unprecedented, massive, powerful building, which is mentioned in the text discussing these battles. You made that story come alive. Who doesn't want to have the Hanukkah story come alive?
The 8-day celebration commemorates the rededication of the temple after the Maccabees captured it from Antiochus. According to the story, when they tried to light the menorah, the Maccabees discovered they only had oil for 1 day. Miraculously, it lasted for 8. Sylvan says these ancient stones cry out with a message for today.
There is a Josephus, and he said that the Greeks made a powerful fortress which controlled the city. The bravery of the Hasmoneans to take on the Greeks who are sitting right there in Jerusalem. The bravery of the Hasmoneans to service in the temple for 25 years when there's Greek soldiers right there. At least we can serve God. So we don't have political freedom, but we can serve God. What a message.
Finally this week, when we interviewed Rabbi Barnea Levi Sylvan, he added his own perspective about the current situation here in Jerusalem. We felt it was worth sharing.
If you're living overseas and you have either a television or a smartphone, you may think that Israel is a place that a sane person should not walk right now, and certainly not Jerusalem, and certainly not the old city of Jerusalem. So as a resident of the old city Jerusalem, who this morning went to the grocery store and bought 4 yogurts and a milk, and came back home and went out to the synagogue and went to a news conference, and whose wife is now driving around town, we live here a normal life. 800,000 residents of Jerusalem are functioning. The millions of people in Israel are functioning. It is not a simple time, but don't look at the spotlight that one camera is putting on this particular place. Please realize life is going on here, and the businesses here are suffering from the lack, as it says in Lamentations, the ways of Zion are empty. It's all perceptions. They would be safer if everybody was here and everybody was visiting. But not just to help the Israeli businessmen, and I'm talking about my Arab neighbors who are crying out near Damascus Gate, and the Arab taxi drivers I spoke with yesterday who think this is going to be years before we can earn a normal living. You need to come to Israel for your spiritual self. Israel ignites your soul.
That's why it's important to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Periscope. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.